Tell me some of your more specific strategy of your tracking and, just some of the things that pop up in your mind. I'm interested in anything and everything you got to say about it.
Okay, so one thing that, I like to hit on. Now, my style of tracking isn't the same as, maybe everybody else's or guys that write books or whatever. But this is what I've found. When I get on a buck track and he's lining out for a long ways and I come into a barnyard situation, when I come into, and for your listeners, a barnyard situation, this might be kind of a Northeastern term. I'll break that down a little bit. It's where you come into an area that's so tracked up, it literally looks like it's a barnyard. So, you've been on the buck track 2 or 3 miles, you come into a barnyard. I think where a lot of guys go wrong is they put their head right to the ground and they try to figure out the track. I've had a lot of success coming into a barnyard. I pump the brakes. I say, okay, I have arrived. This is the destination. I pick my head up. I start scanning. And I start coming through that barnyard just as slow as can be, because a lot of times I've killed a lot of bucks doing this. You're there when you come into the barnyard. One of two things are going to happen: you're either going to see the buck and shoot him, or he's not going to be in the barnyard and it's old, and that's it. I mean, there's really nothing to lose. I mean, but I think a lot of people, they try to sort tracks with their head straight down, and I did that a lot when I was younger. But until I started to figure out, I'm like, man, coming to this barnyard, I don't need to track anymore. I'm here. It all goes back to that fresh sign.
Yeah, I like that. I made a mistake doing that with Brett last year. Basically, right out of the gate, we were down low. We started finding all these big buck tracks in the barnyard. And I was doing the same thing. I just kept spinning in circles. And it's like, oh, there's a big sign. Oh, there's this. Oh, look at this big track. And you track it for a little bit. And then next thing you know, you're like, we've burnt 2 hours doing this. And he told me that we were kind of doing that, and he's like, we should probably just do something else and like kind of get up and move out of here and try to find where they're actually going up. I guess now too, hearing that from you, that makes me kind of have 2 different plays now. So I've got one play being what Brett and I eventually did, was pull out and just go keep climbing. The other option would be to just pump the brakes and just kind of still hunt your way through it, depending maybe on where that is in the terrain. Like in this specific example, it was way, way low, which maybe they were around there. I don't know, but we were putting exactly what you said, putting our head down and just walking in circles. Looking back on it, it's like, yeah, that's a total waste of time. You're never going to sort them out of that.
No, you're never going to sort that out, because, imagine a buck running a doe. That's usually the situation. That's what a barnyard is. I've also seen where 2 bucks come together and they fight, and it makes a freaking 100-yard by 100-yard swath of so many buck tracks. You could literally spend the next week there and never figure out which way they went. And, it's funny because we had the conversation about bare ground. It's like you go you cover all this ground, and then you find a couple fresh rubs or a couple fresh scrapes, and it's like, boop, there the deer are. It's the same thing with tracking. In my mind, there's some guys that'll tell you when you come to the barnyard, you cut a big loop and you try to find where the deer are coming out. I'm not saying that's wrong, but I think you should give yourself a chance and just pick your head up and still hunt your way through that barnyard, because he could be laying right there with that hot doe.
It might be a good opportunity too to incorporate some calling. Maybe you grunt, maybe you rattle.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I wear grunt tubes out tracking. I really do,
yeah.
especially on crunchy snow. The biggest buck I ever shot tracking, I grunted back on crunchy snow.
Massachusetts?
Yep.
Tell that full story.
Okay, so that morning we headed down to Massachusetts, and we had a spot picked on the map. It was Nate, Connor, and myself. It was 3 of us. We all get in this area. We all do a 2-mile loop, and we came to the conclusion that there was just nothing going on in this area. So we regrouped in the truck. It only took us an hour to do that loop. Looking at our maps, and we're trying to come up with something. I was like, well, what about this spot right here? It's 9:00. Yeah, let's try it. So we sent it, and we parked the truck, and we're headed up in the woods, and Nate cut up on the mountain first. So it was just Connor and I heading out through. And we stumble across this rub like this, something that you just dream about, right? And so Connor cuts up on the ridge, and I kept on heading out. And I start swinging up on the mountain, and I hear some deer take off. And I hadn't cut any tracks. I didn't really say this either. There was fresh 2 inches of absolute crap snow, crunchy, loud, awful. So I hadn't cut any tracks, probably a couple, 2 or 3 miles out on this ridge, but I hear some deer take off in front of me. So I go up and investigate, and it looks like 2 or 3 does and a buck. The buck track wasn't like, oh my God, look at the size of this track, but I could tell right away. And, I've looked at enough of them now that I can kind of start to tell, even if it's a smaller foot, I can tell when it's an older buck. And like the biggest thing for me that I'm looking for is they'll turn their front feet out. When they start doing this kind of, and it might be slight, but when they start doing that, I don't know if it's arthritis or what it is, but it seems like those big ones, they start, not big, but old, the old ones. So I look for that a lot. So I saw that, and he was dragging his feet right on the 2 inches of snow, which is also a good sign of at least a tired buck, because a little buck will drag his feet too, but it's a tired buck. So when those deer ran off, the does went one way and the buck went another. So that was another clue to me. I've seen a lot of bucks with does. Seems like smaller bucks they'll hang with the does and they'll like run off with the whole group. But the big ones, they're getting out of there. They like head off to some other place. Mm-hmm. So I kind of, I'm doing some investigating, and I'm not like heading right off on this buck track because it's super crunchy. And, when you're tracking a buck, if you jump them, you have to give them time, because if you just run right after the buck, what they do is they'll run like 200-300 yards. They'll stop and they'll look back to see if you're coming. Just to, I think in their minds, they're like, oh, is this just some random whatever coming through the woods? Or is this something that wants to kill me, basically? Mm-hmm. So, you have to give them time. A lot of guys will say, stop, have a sandwich, make a fire. What I like to do, let's say, I jump a buck, I'll either do a big strategic like swing, like where I think that buck might head, and I've killed bucks doing that, or I'll go like, oh, there's this big swamp down here. I'm going to go check this big swamp for signposts, and I'll come back and get on his track, because that way I'm keeping my gears turning. It puts you in the game, where it's like, if you're just to sit there after you jump them, you're kind of taking yourself out of the game.
I love that.
Yeah. So,
I love that. Yeah.
But anyways, I jumped the buck, and I was like, I'm just going to follow these does for a little while. I followed them. They took me up on this knob. There's a couple rubs and stuff. I was like, okay, I'm going to head back and get on that buck track. So I headed back, got on the buck track, and he was taking me up through this mountain like a big old buck will, just through the most prettiest spots. Like, it's really fun following a big old buck. And so I kind of geek out when I'm on a big buck track like that, because they just show you the coolest things. So I'm heading up, and every like 30 to 40 yards, I'd stop and I'd hit the grunt tube a few times, just bat, 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 just like kind of like a walking grunt. Every 30, 40 yards, I'd do that. And then I come up on this big saddle on top of the mountain, and I hit the grunt tube again. And all of a sudden I hear something in front of me, and I just see his rack coming right at me. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it's muzzleloader season. I click the safety off on the muzzleloader, and he's coming quartering to me. And I basically just yelled at him at like 30, 40 yards, boom, double lunged him, and he dropped right there. It was crazy. The whole thing's on YouTube. It's the biggest buck I've ever seen, ever.
That's awesome. Tell me that story of the one that you looped around.
So I was on this mountain. It's like a 4,400 footer, which it's a pretty good one for the Northeast. And I had scouted this area out in the summertime, and ended up locating this big buck, big sign, the whole thing. And the first snow we got, I want to say it was November 3rd. And I headed up on this ridge, and the whole way up in, never cut a deer track until I was way up on top in the spruces. And sure enough, boom, big, huge buck track. And like, he's like the buck track, huge, like huge buck track. And the way the snow was is it snowed all night. Like probably started like 9-10 p.m. and ended at like maybe like 4 a.m. And the track was pretty snowed in. I'm not afraid to take an old track, especially if it's like that 4-finger humdinger. I'm going to take it just because I know how hard it is to find them I'm not going to walk over it. I'm just going to see where he goes. I'm going to let him teach me something. I'll burn a whole day on an old track. But anyways, I get on his track. It's snowed in, and I'm heading out through these ridges, and he's up on the tops. Like I'm up in the spooky stuff, right? Like you look to your right and it's like 100-foot cliff. You look to your left and it's like just an ocean of spruce, like really cool stuff. And I'm going and probably 2 or 3 miles into it, I look up to my left and I see a deer get up and take off. I'm like, dang it, that was him, because I hadn't seen another track that whole time. It's only the buck track. And the buck track kind of went up to the right on this like steep, like nose of the mountain. He was kind of headed up the nose, and this deer I saw get up and run was off to my left, probably like 100 yards, whatever. So I go over and just head right to where I saw the deer get up and run. Well, it wasn't the buck, just a little tiny, probably 110-pound doe bed. But sure enough, that buck that I was on, he had come down off the ridge and he sniffed her and kept going on his way down over the mountain, but it was smoking hot.
Yeah.
So, okay, if I didn't see that doe get up and run, that buck could have taken me to Timbuktu and back, and I would have never caught him probably. But that, like, just to see that there's that luck element for me to see that doe get up and run, and for me to go over there and be like, oh my gosh, here's this fresh track, like coming down off the ridge. So I start going on his track down over the ridge, and like 5 minutes later I see him get up out of his bed below me and he crashed down over the mountain. I'm like, oh my gosh. So at that split second I was like, I'm gonna head back up to, because this was like down over, getting down towards the spruce line where the softwoods meets the hardwoods. Mm-hmm. And in that split second, he ran straight down off, and I was like, man, a lot of times they try to get above you. That's what they do. And I was like, I'm going to head right back up to the top where he had just went through 2 times in the last 12 hours. He kind of liked that spot for some reason. There's like a nose and then like another secondary ridge. I'm like, I'm going to go right back up there. And if he comes back up through, I'm going to smoke him. If not, I'll come back and get on his track. Well, I start hoofing it back up to that nose, and we literally met right on the top. And I shot him head on at 10 yards. And it was the most insane thing. And I wasn't videoing either at this point. But I can't even tell you how crazy it was. And it was muzzleloader season too. So I shoot him at like 10 yards. And like he stopped behind the spruce tree. And like I only see like half of him because he like sees me right at the same time I see him. And oh my gosh. So I like click safety off and I like lean over to my right and I shoot. And then he runs right by me. Like I could have like poked him with the barrel because, well, there's no real estate up on top of those mountains either. Like there's nothing there. So he runs right by me, and I have the muzzleloader. So I mean, I could have shot him 5 more times if I had my rifle. But the shot that I put on him, all I hit was his windpipe. So I had to chase him for the rest of the day, and I ended up killing the buck. But and on snow, I'm confident doing that.
Yeah. Do you have footage of like following up?
Yeah.
Okay, I've watched that.
That was a good buck. He weighed 194.
He is beautiful. That's a sweet story, man.